a lot about sustainability and throughout the discussions, in fact, and there's a view I've heard, and I think I share it, that 2019 was something of a tipping point for the world in terms of sustainability, or at least how it's being embraced. Climate change has moved to the very top of the agenda for countries, for companies, for investors, for individuals. And the focus on reducing carbon emissions may accelerate investment in and adoption of renewables. The rhetoric around the dangers of not taking immediate action has also escalated. A growing number of warnings of dire consequences. A private report to clients by economists from JP Morgan, which was leaked a couple of days ago, used the term human life as we know it could be threatened by climate change, and without action there could be catastrophic outcomes. They're pretty tough words. BP, of course, has recently announced that it aims to shrink its carbon footprint to net zero by 2050. In Saudi, billions has been earmarked for renewable projects, including solar and wind farms. The $110 billion development of the Jafurah gas field, that was announced just late last week, also will have an impact on Saudi's drive towards a clean energy mix. So there's just a huge amount happening in this area. So let's discuss that. Let's delve into some of the details here. I'm joined now by Maria-Ortiz, who's Managing Partner for EMEA at Palladium. Gregory Fayet, who's General Manager EDF Energies Saudi Arabia. Sylvain Cote, who's Senior Economist Saudi Aramco, and Kane, Senior Business Correspondent, or Columnist I should say, at Arab News. Welcome, gentlemen. Frank, I want to start with you. You're at Davos, and you also covered the Finance Ministers' G20 meeting here a couple of days ago. In Davos, it was all about sustainability and climate change. At the G20 meeting, it was mentioned that the word environment popped up somewhere, but it seemed to be not as high on the agenda. So are we at this inflection point in terms of thinking on sustainability?
Well, Michael, you're certainly right. It was top of the agenda at Davos. It was more like a climate change conference in many respects. The Greta and Donald show, but it certainly went mainstream at Davos, and I would say 60% of the conversations were about climate change, and also notably climate change rather than sustainability, which is a rather vaguer concept. It was specifically about damage to the environment and the economic implications of that. At the finance ministers meeting just 2 days ago, I wasn't actually at the meeting, of course, which was in the convention centre. I had to rough it with the rest of the media in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, which was awful. But word did creep across the lawn of various disagreements about how prominently up the agenda climate change should be. And in the end, it wasn't very prominent at all. In fact, coronavirus made it to the first paragraph of the communique. There was a mention of the environment in paragraph 3, I believe. And climate change came in quite low down, a quite tangential reference to the finance ministers looking at the stability implications of climate change. So, I mean, it certainly was mainstream at Davos, but I have a feeling that it will become more mainstream as the G20 preparations get in full swing. And we heard Lubna, mention the importance of this as a big issue for the B20, the business section of the G20. So I think it's an issue that obviously it has huge implications for the region, being a carbon-based economy. I think it's one that will just become more mainstream as the year wears on.
Okay, I want to stick with that just broad thing first before we get into some of the detail. Is that your view that we are now in a new era of recognition of and embracing of and understanding the importance of and acting on climate change and sustainability?
Well, I think that climate change is one of these underlying topics that will transform the economy globally and will transform the region. We're talking about the coronavirus and the impact on the economy. That's something that will happen during this year, but climate change is something that is a tectonic plate change
Yes.
that will change the economy. Ambition 2030 partially is a response of this decarbonization in the world, and therefore I think it's one of the biggest topics in any agenda, in any political and economical agenda, is about climate change, because the future is at risk, and obviously if we don't adapt, the implications on the economy, on the jobs, on life, no, on the other life.
But in terms of governments, of companies, of investors, of individuals, are we now at a stage where there's a demand, and that's now quite for immediate action? Gregory, would you say that? Are we now at a point where sustainability, which is the derivative of renewable energy, is so high on the agenda that there's going to be regulatory change, there's going to be investment shifts as a result of this current film?
First, I would like to thank for the invitation. It's quite an honor to be there. For me, I'm the CEO of a company called EDF, a French utility, one of the biggest electricity companies worldwide. And of course, one of our main policy, I would say, is to contribute to develop a new generation plant, we would say with a limitation in terms of CO2 emissions, so renewable and nuclear. I would say for Saudi Arabia, something I discovered, so of course Saudi Arabia is very rich in terms of underground resources, I would say oil, gas, sure no one will learn about it. It's the fact that today Saudi Arabia is maybe the country in the world where it is cheapest to produce renewable. So of course they do it for sustainability. But we say if there is one country in the world where it is economically wise to produce PV, solar or wind, it is Saudi Arabia. It's something that has to be focused. So far, the kingdom succeeded to launch utility scale tender for one for solar, one for wind, and for both of them they reach world record prices. So it means that the investor like us, of course there is tough competition, which is why as well they reach world record price, but I would say the climate conditions here are almost perfect for both solar and wind. So it is, of course it's good for sustainability. I have to say when we discuss with the energy industry, it is also good for economic reasons.
Yeah. Sylvain, again, is the mood now where there's going to be a much more accelerated push for renewables because of demand for sustainable investments and the push for net zero carbon economy?
Well, there's been, the announcement has been made last year about some of the ambitious targets. 9.5 gigawatts by 2023, 58.7 gigawatts by 2030. And within that, the process is in place, and we will see, I think it's proceeding, and we'll see where it goes. But within that, something that we need to keep our eyes on is basically what will be the impact? Because sustainability has many dimensions. Environmental, of course, but also social. And one key question here about this push for diversification, because it really reduces itself within that plan, which is Vision 2030. How many jobs will be created as a result of that push towards renewable? My colleague here, Gregory, talked about the conditions being perfect for this. So there's obviously potential and opportunities. But when we look at the employment opportunities, there's some constraint. There's been a lot of announcement about even 100,000 jobs I've seen a few years ago. But when we look at the allocation of those jobs within that specific sector, we see that most of the jobs will be during two phases of the life of that project. It's basically during the construction phase, and also the operational and O&M phase, operation and maintenance. And that will be about 70% of all the jobs during the life of a project like that. And we see that most of these jobs actually are occupied by foreign workers. So, as we know, Saudi Arabia is entering what we call the demographic dividend, which will be really in its most intense phase between 2015 and 2030, incidentally. And it doesn't look like this sector, as it is for jobs in a power plant, solar plant, or even wind, will generate a lot of jobs in those sectors, because Saudis are not very present in those sectors. 8% Saudis in construction. If we decide, the authority decides to do manufacturing, it's about 20%. So there's some potential for technical jobs during the operational and maintenance phase, and that's so you need the ecosystem to train, but to train all the Saudis entering the labor market. 50% of those are only 25, so that's the population we need to worry about. But the biggest potential is not really what we should look at. It's basically the entrepreneurial opportunities that could be created as a result of creating value chain around that sector, and that's something that I think we need to look for.
Frank, oil prices are under pressure, various reasons, particularly recently coronavirus and the expectation of slower growth and slower demand. Is that likely to have an impact on investment in renewables?
Well, for sure. People won't put money into an asset that's falling in value, will they? I mean, you can break this up into two ways, really. I think obviously the coronavirus outbreak has had a severe effect on prospects for economic growth. We've heard that this morning, and in turn that always affects oil prices. But I'm wondering whether also we are seeing a weakness in the fundamental pricing structure of oil as well, because at the same time as the coronavirus effect, we've had OPEC Plus talking about extending cuts, which would generally pull prices back up, and there has been no effect whatsoever. And I know that some oil analysts think that we're on the verge of a new era here, where the orthodox way of looking at oil prices, cutting, will no longer have the effect that it used to have, even when it's a bigger organisation, Saudi, Russia, in OPEC plus. So, and to answer your question, yes, people won't put money into a falling asset, I think, and we've seen at the same time some very hard-headed financiers, BlackRock, for example, said that they were not going to go into some fossil fuels, coal in particular, and one analyst compared the oil industry to big tobacco, if you recall, all those decades ago when big tobacco was pittering, and rightly so for the harmful effects it had on health. Now it seems crazy to me to put oil in the same category as smoking. We need oil for everyday life. We don't need to smoke, but I think that's a mark of where the debate is going.
Yes, that's part of that shift in thinking.
Yes.
That sort of thing.
Yes.
Extreme though that view may be. As I say, there is lots of talk of energy transition. BP is the latest to say, it's very ambitious targets. But some say a lot of the details are sketchy from the big players, but how to achieve the zero emissions. Can it be realised? Are these realistic?
Well, I think they are sketchy because they don't fully know how they are going to embrace it. I think that's the direction of travel. How this is going to happen is quite tactical. No? There's a strategic outline to transform the production towards renewable and neutral carbon footprint. The how is something that different companies are figuring out. I'm looking here at my colleague on my left, that probably they are part of the solution, and the other colleague on the further left is how they are going to transform an economy that's based on carbon into an economy that is based on non-carbon emission. And that's a huge transformation of the economy, and has huge implications for global champions, the company that is worth most in the world, here sitting in this panel and talking about renewable and carbon neutral position. I think that's an example of how big the shift is. we see these commitments, we see companies delivering against those commitments, like Microsoft or others, like technology champions, and we're going to be seeing energy companies delivering against this transition. The other day, I read the letter from Warren Buffett about Berkshire, and he was talking about how the energy company has become a champion, basing all their strategy for the last 20 years in renewables, and how this has transformed the whole Iowa ecosystem around renewable energies. But it has been 20 years of non-stop investment in transforming a whole company. Do we have 20 years? And I think that's the question that we have here in the team.
EDF, you're running the wind project, the biggest in Saudi, the first in Saudi, and I think the biggest in the region. Is this the first of many? You said that Saudi is perfectly placed for renewables. Will this current environment, and by that I mean political environment and sort of private sector talk, accelerate some of the projects that might get off the ground in Saudi?
So yes, maybe so this year in 2020, I would see the COD of the project in 2022. Saudi Arabia will produce its first electricity from wind, and as well Saudi Arabia did produce its first as a utility scale, I would say PV plant early this year or last December 2019. So it is new in Saudi Arabia. Then, and as well, just to comment what my colleague Sylvain, when we invest in Saudi Arabia to develop a wind farm, our first objective, it is the way we are assessed by the tender organization, is the price. I say that because if you want to create jobs in Saudi Arabia, the tendering process is not the most suitable one. I would say for a simple reason, all the product that we use, for most of the product that we use, to the nacelle, the blades, the turbines for the wind, the trackers or the PV panel for solar farm, they come from Asia. Okay? And as well it's cheap. If tomorrow Saudi Arabia wants to have this industry, because it is time to create an industry in Saudi, in France, Europe, we try to create an industry on solar, and I'm not sure we get the results that were expected. So the only way to create an industry is to have partnership.
So this is a policy change required in Saudi, so that tendering is not the way to do this.
What Saudi Arabia Ministry announced, along with PIF, is to have, as my colleague Sylvain said, a 60 gigawatt renewable plan by 2030. 1/3 will be through tendering, and 2/3 through bilateral agreement. So 60 gigawatt is $60 billion. It is, of course, we hope to have bilateral agreement discussion. But just for me to explain, if tomorrow there is let's say there are four players for wind industry in terms of turbine. Us, EDF, we choose number X for Dumat agenda, but we might choose Y or Z for the second one. So this turbine manufacturer, they cannot invest in Saudi Arabia because they need offtake guarantee for 10 years. So I think the way, from the vision of 2030 vision and this 60 gigawatt plan to have 2/3 by partnership is the good way. But then it's another difficulty is to put that in place. So they might succeed, but I would just to say that when you tender, it is the price that matters. And then we cannot do both.
In fact, regulation is going to play a big role in neutral, in zero carbon emissions, isn't it?
Sure, yeah. I wonder whether we need to beef up international regulation in this respect. We have seen how individual governments take a different approach across the world to climate change and other environmental issues. There is no common agreement, less so now that the US has pulled out. Perhaps the UN or some other international body needs to jump in. It doesn't always have a 100% record of success, but at least it's a shot. We are in the strange position where the US, the biggest energy consumer, the biggest energy polluter, has the least regulation and is becoming less so. I mean, it's almost being shamed by China. So yes, I think regulation has to be. I'd be interested to hear from the technocrats here whether solar and wind and even nuclear is sufficient, to get us to the position that we want to be by 2050. We have Saudi Aramco, as we speak here today, they have a big conference in Riyadh at the moment. I'm wondering if they're going to pull something out of the hat, that effectively removes CO2 and methane from the atmosphere. Is that kind of technological advance possible? And what would the regulator say to that?
No, technology's got to be a huge part of this, doesn't it, because, as you quite rightly say, firstly, from an investment point of view, how does one invest it? It needs to make money. Carbon capture technology, which seems to have eluded everyone, at least on a scale. So what role does tech play in trying to achieve these goals?
Well, I think technology, as we were talking in the earlier panel, is in all industries as well in the electricity industry. There's the carbon capture, and maybe you can comment on the question if you're going to take a rabbit out of the hat about capture carbon. But we're talking about technology for efficiency. We're talking very much about product, about supply. We don't talk about demand. And one of the biggest challenges here in this country is about demand. So technology associated to efficiency demand is a big topic. Technology associated, if we see a race of renewables, you cannot stop renewables, you cannot disconnect it. Well, you can disconnect them from the grid, but you cannot disconnect the wind from stopping. So how you balance supply and demand, if you arrive to elements of peak, therefore technology associated to storage is a big opportunity in the market, and if there's solutions at scale that can generate storage of energy, it's another big technological revolution that can transform the industry. So I think there's, and obviously all the associated elements of fintech associated to payment for energy and the economics of energy. And then there's the layer that comes with regulations that will bring to another category all this discussion, which is the carbon markets. No? If they develop, that's another transformation. So I think there's many layers of technology that we're going to be seeing in the transformation, being one of them only the production of renewables, which is only one component of the whole technological value chain.
I know everybody's going to start asking questions. We have a question over here. You have a microphone and one there, so two over there.
Good afternoon, it's Khadim Hajjaj again from Standard Chartered. There is a fundamental market contradiction actually when it comes to renewables, and especially given that we often talk about that the solution for dealing with sustainability and climate change quite often lays with the very producers which are producing the extractable materials which are in fact contributing to this global warming. And you see this in Saudi Arabia and Australia and in the US in particular. And there's a fundamental contradiction there whereby the more energy units you remove from the market, fundamentally the more depressed the price becomes, whereby it directly then impacts the economy. Why would Saudi Arabia or Australia or the US even want to do that? There was a huge political economy problematic that would ensue as a result of that. So I don't know how you get around it, but I'm not convinced that these countries are the ones that are best equipped to actually deal with the crisis around climate change. They're part of the solution, that's for sure, but to saddle them with a fundamental responsibility perhaps would be politically naive in some ways. The other issue is how do you create the push and pull factors to actually engender sustainability. So we see Northern European states whereby some of them can operate for days upon end without emitting any carbon into the environment, and they do so because there are fundamental grassroots push and pull factors which are driven by both consumer demand and government regulation that enable this. Most of the world is still very far away from this. So
it is, as we were saying earlier, I think, it's a combination of government, it's private sector, it's investors. I think the investment community has a huge amount to do with this, but it's also individuals and consumers. I would agree you need the whole suite of vested interest and stakeholders to buy into this if there's any progress going to be made.
Yes, and that's why I think that renewables on their own will not do it. It has to be a much broader framework. I think that's the point you were making, isn't it?
Yes.
Right down to consumers, individual consumers' habits, buying habits.
Yes.
The old paying for a plastic bag. I'd be interested to see an economic study of that effect and what the long-term effect of that is. I don't think one exists as yet.
I don't think it has. There have been a few anecdotal things. But there's also a question now just behind you, please. Yeah.
Development Digital Support Center. Seeing this ESG trend, I want to know, or if you have answered or discussed the effect, short-term effect on oil stocks and stock market or shares, oil company shares, and how would that, is that going to affect the climate in the near future or not?
The effect of the decline in oil shares, which have been falling, and particularly recently, due to coronavirus, but generally speaking have been on a downward trend anyway. Is that going to affect the push for sustainability renewables?
Yeah.
Gentlemen, please, Sylvain.
I can just add that the way we look at trends right now, oil will remain, an important source of energy for at least the next 20 years. And if we look at it even a broader context, in history, of the world, energy, we haven't really seen yet a condition where a source of energy has been replaced by another one. They tend to build upon one another. So there's a diversification in the energy sector among its sources, and this looks like it will continue. Maybe oil will be on a downward trend in the future, but it won't. It doesn't look like it will disappear, at least for the next 20 years.
Okay. Look, I'm afraid we're out of time. We need to leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Jose Maria-Ortiz, Gregory Fayet, Sylvain Cote, and Frank Kane.